The biggest prevailing mystery in all of Berserk has to be the God Hand. We know who they are, sure, but we barely know anything about who they were, or indeed if they're the only ones. For a very long time, fans of Berserk believed that no matter how shrouded their origins might be, the one fact that we knew about the God Hand was that there was only one such group in existence. And then chapter 362 dropped a bombshell on our heads by showing us another. These primordial demons slash angels that flank Void upon his birth have the look of God Hand members, but are they part of that unholy brotherhood? And if yes, who exactly are they? We'll discover all that and more in this video, so get your seatbelts on because this is going to be one twisted ride. The Angels of the Abyss. Origins of the Old God Hand Theory. Like many things related to Berserk's shrouded history, the origins of the Old God Hand Theory lies in chapter 53 of the manga. Titled Thousand Year Fiefdom, it talks about how Midland became Midland and what lies at the bottom of the Tower of Rebirth. Of all the monuments in the capital city of Wyndham, that tower is the oldest, dating back to its founding. Back then, Wyndham wasn't a city itself, it was part of a larger city that encompassed the entire kingdom of Midland. This city was the heart of the old world, and from it ruled Supreme King Berserk. Berserk was the only man in human history said to have united all of mankind under a single banner. He ruled his global empire from his gigantic city, which was called Midland, because of its central location in the world. Very little is known about Berserk's personal history before his rise to power, but all sources agree that he was a savage warrior king who had no competition in the field of battle. His ruthlessness earned him many nicknames like the Demon King or the King of Galloping Death, but it was likely the skull-shaped battle helm he wore to war that inspired such tales about him. Or at least that's what the narrator of this part of the story seems to think. Of course, we now know that it was because Berserk fought using the Berserker armor, but the armor and its history weren't a part of Guts' story at that point. Princess Charlotte's impromptu lesson is interrupted by Judo, who corroborates it with the fairy tale of the Skull King. Apparently, once Berserk was done conquering his empire, he imported workers from all over the place to build his massive capital city. Once he was done that, he lived in obscene lavishness while imposing greater and greater taxes on his subjects to sustain his appetites. His avarice and lust for power and luxury eventually crossed such a threshold that God himself sent down 5 angels to destroy Berserk's city with lightning and great earthquakes. Midland disappeared almost overnight, and in the aftermath, Berserk's empire disintegrated into the many countries and kingdoms of his current timeline. While there exists a dispute about the number of angels that partook in his downfall, the part of the fable that is true is that his city was buried using some sort of great disaster magic, and its remains were the great secret of the city of Wyndham. The Tower of Rebirth was built after a wave of inquisitions by the Holy See as a symbol of its strength and a prison facility, but its true purpose was to seal the truth about Berserk's fallen empire. The dungeons underneath its ground level went no deeper than the tower did overhead, but the hole in its core stretched down near endlessly. Charlotte claimed that it was as deep as a mountain, and it was also where Berserk's ancient cities slept. Inquisitors and explorers had ventured into the pit within the Tower of Rebirth many times, but none had returned. The characters within the story don't know why this is, but we find out when Casca accidentally drops her torch into that abyss and it lights up the ruins of Berserk's city as it plummets. Upon landing, the torch highlights dozens upon dozens of shriveled up corpses, all of which share one grim feature: the brand of sacrifice carved into their foreheads. This was our first hint that the downfall of mankind's greatest empire had something to do with the God Hand. By this point in the manga, we knew that there were going to be 5 God Hand members, and the Golden Age arc was basically about getting to the 5th. Before Griffith joined their ranks, the God Hand consisted of Void, Slan, Ubik, and Conrad, who had been doing their evil song and dance for centuries. Griffith becoming a part of them would round out their numbers, and the God Hand has always been referred to as the Guardian Angels of Desire. That the brand of sacrifice, a symbol deeply associated with their machinations, showed up at the gravesite of Berserk's capital is proof of their involvement in its destruction, and that became even more evident when we heard the story about Berserk and the Sage. In chapter 138, Father Mosgus tells Farnace and Serpico the story of a sage who was imprisoned by Berserk for denouncing his excesses. This sage proclaimed the Skull King's sins to God in the midst of all sorts of torture until an angel was made to descend. This story parallels that of Griffith and also solves the puzzle of whether there were 4 or 5 angels involved in destroying Berserk's capital. The Tower of Conviction would have been a part of his Midland, considering its scope, and if the 5th angel appeared to the sage personally, then it makes sense why stories would conflict on their numbers, right? But this is also where things start to get twisted, because that 5th angel is clearly implied to be Void, the current archangel of the God Hand. There are many contextual clues that contribute to this idea, starting with his rivalry with Skull Knight, aka what remains of Geiserik, and his sermon-like pattern of speech, but the main giveaway is his physical appearance. While his kinsmen have chosen to take on forms that most reflect their ideas of the ideal form, Void looks like the polar opposite of that concept. What kind of sadist would cook up an ideal version of themselves where their eyes were sewn shut, their brain was exposed, and the flesh around their mouth and nose had been pulled back to reveal the bone underneath? If Berserk action figures are to be taken as canon, Void has nothing underneath his robe except for a massive spinal column, and that makes his ideal form even more confusing. Slan is a known sadist. The woman was shot with a cannon and run through with a sword, and she unironically asked for more. But even she didn't choose a form for herself that appears as tortured as Void does, opting for the beautiful succubus vibe to experience her share of pleasure and pain. Still, if it's just a sadism thing, then Void gets the pass because he closes the last cycle of the God Hand, right? In the Black Swordsman arc, and even during the eclipse, the God Hand were referred to as demonic angels, and surely with the branded corpses being found in the Tower of Rebirth, it must have been the God Hand that attacked Geiserik's capital, right? Well, here's where things get even trickier. The day the world changed, the old God Hand's first appearance. A lot of what we know about Void's story parallels the journey that Griffith takes to become a God Hand. The White Falcon was a prominent leader of men who was imprisoned for sleeping with the king's daughter, but tortured for his exposure of the king's sinful attraction towards her. He spent his year in confinement praying for vengeance, with the images of guts and the castle from his dreams being his only sustenance. Eventually, when he felt as though he was going mad, he was visited by the current iteration of the God Hand in his cell in the Tower of Rebirth and promised a place amongst them as the Blessed King of Longing. That came true with the eclipse, and Griffith became the final finger of the God Hand by sacrificing his band of mercenaries like Void had sacrificed Geiserik's capital before him. We know from Flora's description of them in chapter 202 that all of them were human once, so in a way, Griffith is just the new Void, or the final one if he has indeed completed the circle. But then came chapter 362 and it flipped everything we thought we knew about the God Hand on its head. So far, we had assumed that there must have been two versions of the God Hand, considering everything we're told about the past of Berserk, but turns out that wasn't quite correct. Chapter 362 shows us the final moments of Geiserik's life before he became Skull Knight, and while it is true that a God Hand sacrifice was involved in his downfall, and that ritual was initiated by Void, what doesn't seem to add up are the appearances of the people that flank him in that vision. In chapter 362, we see a swarm of tentacles covering a grand old city, with the abyss lurking in the skies. Geiserik, clad in the Berserker armor, kills the hairy demons emerging from the gaps between them, trying to make his way to the 5 silhouettes standing atop a rock. The only stop he makes before reaching them is to look down at his dying partner and see a fiery brand of sacrifice engulfing his city, but when he gets to them, the only person he or we recognize even remotely is Void. Like we just mentioned, the current iteration of the God Hand is composed of humans that became the executioners of the will of something much larger that lurks within the abyss. This happened when they received the Crimson Behelit, and it activated at their most desperate hour. Because they were all humans in their previous lives, they look vaguely humanoid in their new ones, with Griffith being the only true monster among them. Conrad looks like a massive louse of a child, and Slan is the image of a seductress. Ubik floats around with his tiny octopus body, and he has the unsettling grin of a human psychopath. Void may look like the poster boy for a How to Torture People Good guidebook, but at least he still looks like a person. Griffith's only human characteristics as a reborn God Hand are his face and his rock-hard abs. The rest of his body sports the claws and talons of a falcon, and he has bat-like wings that double as his cape. With that said, only 2 of the creatures we see standing beside Void in that blood memory look even vaguely human. One of them is practically a rehashing of Chatterer from the Hellraiser series, and the other is a sea lion statue made oddly hollow and eyeless. These 2 are clearly based on something other than humans, even though Chatterer Hand's inverted face slit has the menacing mouth of a woman. Before we can figure out who these guys are, Guts is pulled out of the vision and a new mystery is born. Was this the first God Hand? And if so, then who the hell were its members? At least half of them looked nothing like the current iteration of the Order, and all of them resemble humans for the most part. With this old God Hand, even the ones that look human feel alien. The one on the extreme left looks more Transformer than demon, what with the metallic looking facial features and gigantic beard and mane. The one on the extreme right has the face of a beautiful woman, but she has so many pointy breast-like sacs adorning her body that who's to say she isn't a manticore shapeshifter? What we're trying to say is these guys are clearly inhuman and must have been so before they became whatever they are in chapter 362. But this just brings up even more questions. humans. How in the world could Inhumans become God Hand members when Behelit seemed to be only destined for humans? Did something change with the God Hand when Void was born? And if they aren't members of the God Hand, why did these four beings seemingly help out, or at the very least approve of Void destroying a massive population of humans? Well, now that we've given you a full look at the picture, let's start dissecting it. Who are these God Hand members apart from Void? Will we see them again? The key to understanding just who these four beings flanking Void can be, ironically enough, lies with the Holy See. Most of this information comes from the deleted chapter 83, so you can skip if you want to, but considering you clicked on this video, we're assuming you're past caring about spoilers, so we're gonna give it to you straight. The Holy See as a religious order did not exist until after the downfall of Geiseric's empire. When it was created, it adopted a similar structure to the Catholic churches, making torture its official judicial doctrine and adopting a falcon in flight as its religious symbol. Symbols play a huge role in not just storytelling, but religion as well. Abrahamic faiths do not believe in giving a face to God as religions like Hinduism do, so worship is offered to objects associated with his divinity. In Christianity, it's the cross, because it was upon the cross that Jesus bled for and reclaimed humanity. Since that day, the cross has been seen as the holiest of Christian symbols, and even if a facsimile of it is used in a non-religious connotation, controversy abounds. Similarly, the falcon in flight that is the holy symbol of Berserk's Holy See is a representation of Griffith's return to Earth as the savior of the world. This is why when he's incarnated and starts performing miracles out of nowhere like medieval Jesus Christ, people don't question it. Rather, they take it as proof of God's existence and embrace Griffith as their savior, with the Pope himself appointing him as the prophetic falcon of light. Currently, he rules the city of Falconia and all of humanity by extension, given his position as the figurehead of the world's largest religion and the betrothed of the named ruler of its only functional kingdom, Princess Charlotte. All this was laid out for him by the idea of evil, which is the overarching power lurking within the abyss that every God Hand member serves. When Griffith met the idea in chapter 83, he was shocked to learn that his every move, his entire life in fact, had been designed to play out a certain way centuries ago. It was the idea that created the appropriate context for his birth, merge blood with blood, and then his rebirth by sending him his falcons and giving him purpose. Every encounter Griffith had ever had was manipulated by the idea to play out that way, and now that they'd finally met, everything they'd do would be accomplished together as one being. Once Griffith accepted evil into his heart, he was given his form as the God Hand Femto, and he became a driver of the river of destiny called Causality, as well as a part of its current. It has been implied numerous times in the series that the only reason the Holy See was created was to increase the influence of the God Hand over the world whilst marginalizing other practitioners of the arcane. The See professes ideals of virtue and self-sacrifice, but in truth, it's nothing more than a vessel to spread chaos and fear. In the name of faith, Mosgus profusely tortures his enemies and even adherents of the See, thereby strengthening the astral presence of evil in St. Albion and facilitating the incarnation ceremony. By burning heretics, Farnace filled a parent-shaped hole in her heart that she only realized once she'd been touched by the true hand of God. The See's actions suppress all magic that can actually counter evil and propagates the malaise that the God Hand feeds off of, but there are exceptions to this rule. There are two instances in which the Holy See warns against the God Hand as opposed to being a vehicle for them. The first is the prophecy of the Falcon, which correctly labels Griffith as the Falcon of Darkness and the harbinger of the end times. This prophecy, as it turns out, is also one shared by the mages. The witch Flora has her disciple confirm Griffith's incarnation as a sign of the Falcon's arrival, and she prepares her to accompany Guts on his journey because of that knowledge. The other truth that the See's scriptures have somehow managed to record is the existence of its four cardinal angels, who are the four kings of the world in truth. We meet the four kings for the first time in chapter 209. After going through an elaborate ritual, Shirke summons aspects of the four kings who are associated with the four directions and four elements to protect the villagers of Enoch Village from trolls. The village priest is baffled by the invocation of magic, but Shirke explains that the four kings are actually the same as the cardinal angels of his faith. These kings love humans and protect them by burning evil astral beings after they're invoked to extend a protective bulwark. The four kings are also clearly protector deities, as any villagers that had been harmed by the trolls were healed within their bulwark, and Shirke also explained to the unenlightened priest that magic was possible by creating a sanctuary in one's mind. But let's back up to the physical depictions of these kings, because that's where the key to cracking this thing really resides. The four kings are actually of mixed mixed gender, 2 males and 2 females. The kings of the north and the east, who rule over the earth and the wind respectively, are depicted as having male silhouettes. The kings of the west and south, who rule over water and fire, are depicted as having female bodies, with the southern king even wielding a sword. Call us crazy, but doesn't this match the description of the old god hand members we see in chapter 362 standing on either side of Void? Beard guy on the extreme left looks like his body is made of rocks and his hair is made of crystals, both things clearly associated with the earth. Sea lion boy is small and has a disproportionately large head, but the holes that cover his entire body could be outlets for wind, which is why his silhouette form depicts him as though he were wearing the sylph cloak. Either of the ladies could be fire or water, but if we had to guess, we'd say the one with the full face is a water-aligned being simply because her body does look kind of like a strange oceanic plant. This would make Chatterer Woman the representation of fire, which sure, she lacks the hands to hold a sword like her Four Kings silhouette, but are we really going to question that about literal gods? For all we know, her mouth could spit a flaming sword out and wield it better than a hand wields a blade. Plus, let's not forget that the confusion between the angels that destroyed Geiserk's capital was caused because of Void's birth. The reason some people think there were only 4 of them is because at one point we're sure there were only 4 kings. But with Void, the astral world found its 5th elemental representative. Berserk has mostly been presented as a series where 4 forces reign supreme, but that isn't true. The founding basis of its power system is the Godai school of philosophy, and in that school, the 5th element is limitless space, aka Void. Kentaro Miura was once asked what the key to understanding the God Hand's origins was, and his answer was Void. But the kanji he uses for the character coincides with the kanji used to represent Void in Godai philosophy, which makes total sense. In chapter 209, Shirke summons the 4 kings from empty space, which translated another way means from the void. Cast your minds back to the only time we've seen Void use his magic. It was in chapter 88, and in that chapter, Void opened up a spatial portal to deflect Skull Knight's point-blank stab right back at him. This should clear up any doubts about his status as an elemental king. It's perhaps because of this reason that he chose to retain his appearance from the last moments of his human life, because with this ascension, Void was now basically a god. Void's birth completed the set of the 5 elemental kings, and his master is clearly the idea of evil, with him being its archangel. In chapter 362, we see him standing on a platform with the rest of his peers, and the platform looks like a closed fist. This is indicative of the fact that Void is the last elemental king and the first god hand. With the birth of each subsequent god hand member, the closed fist opened up to accommodate a new finger, and when it was time for Griffith's rebirth, it was an open hand. The right hand of doom, to be precise. While the 4 kings have shown themselves to be friends of mankind for the most part, we can understand why they would welcome the destruction of Geiserk's empire. Even he himself admitted that he died a foolish king and was reborn a wraith that now wanders through the endless night. Maybe the fables about his downfall were embellished to a certain extent, but they weren't all lies. Geiserk had been using the Berserker armor to claim his kingdom, and if guts is any indication, we know just how degenerative that thing can be for one's psyche. Even with an army of magicians, he couldn't have held back its ode if he didn't restrain himself, and considering he died wearing it, he clearly didn't. Deity's actions go beyond simply good and bad. If Geiserk was a threat to the natural order of existence, the 4 kings would have had no problem agreeing to his demise. But that doesn't explain why they'd just let Void and the God Hand take free reign over the world unless they were confined within their spaces by the Master of Space itself. Of course, there could be another explanation as to who these 4 entities are. Maybe there really was a God Hand before the current one. After all, history does seem to be repeating itself, but we've got a feeling there wasn't, because humans would usually only become a part of the spirit world either as restless spirits or as powerful daemons. Flora now resides in the astral world as a living embodiment of fire, and she was clearly a human being. It wouldn't be unusual, but the way Miura has phrased this entire thing and the hints he dropped in his rare interviews, we're sure this is it. The 4 kings are the old God Hand members, and perhaps the malign aspects of what they represent. After all, life is filled with such contradictions and dualities, and while fire represents life, it also represents death. Marvelous verdict! And that's it from our end. The 4 kings and Void being the 5 angels that destroyed Geiserk's empire and unleashed the God Hand's influence on the world perhaps barely makes sense, but it does when you consider everything we've said so far. But if they aren't part of the first God Hand, and these guys from chapter 362 are some other types of demonic angels we've never seen before, then we'd love to know what you think down in the comments below. This is Wheezy249 signing off, but you can always find me on Twitch, and until next time, don't forget to keep struggling, strugglers.